But I do know that this principle of relational spirituality has given me a permission slip to say, I have a relationship to anxiety. I have a relationship to depression. I have a relationship to self.
Welcome to the Fearless Happyness podcast, where we showcase phenomenal individuals who have overcome serious traumas, life obstacles, and challenges to find their own path to fearless happiness. Listen as Max Nijst invites guests from all around the world to share their experiences and spread strength, hope, and faith. This is the Fearless Happyness podcast, and this is Max Nijst.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this world. This is Max from the Fearless Happyness podcast. And again, yes, I have another amazing and special guest joining me today. His name is Andrew, but what I'll like to do, Andrew, is have you introduce yourself to my audience, like who you are, what it is you do, and then you and I are going to rock and roll.
All right. So I'm going to introduce myself in the traditional language of my ancestors, which is a language called Inde Baza, or the people's tongue. So Dagote, She Inde, Andrew Ecker, Yinashe, Adona E, Nishinigi E, Inde Nashe, Irish Bashachin, Inde Dashache, German Dashanali, Akote Goe E Tashli E, Portland, Oregon, Inasha, Shema E, Kathy Lindsay Woye, Shaza E, Del Ecker Wole. So my name is Andrew Ecker. My mother, Kathy Lindsay. My father, Dale Ecker. My mother's mother, Elba Gallegos, Apache woman from New Mexico. She grew up in a little town called Capitan, right outside the Mescalero Reservation, where my mom was also raised. Although my ancestral lines go back to the Madera Valley of Texas and Chihuahua, Mexico, the Apaches from that area are called Lapon Band Apache. My father's mother, Evelyn Beatty, an Irish woman from Pennsylvania, she was very proud of the fact that William Beatty, our ancestor, fought in the Revolutionary War to establish this country. My mother's father, Leroy Lindsay, a Korean and Vietnam War veteran, and my father's father, Wayne Ecker, a World War II veteran. I have a daughter, Bailey, a son, Peyton, a beloved fiance named Monica. I was born in the ancestral land of the Multnomah Clackamas and Willamette in Portland, Oregon, although I currently reside here in the ancestral land of the Akmel Atam, the Peepash, and the Hohokam in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm grateful to be here with you. That's who I am. What I do is I'm a peer support specialist, a certified recovery coach, nationally recognized mental health speaker, and the developer of Drumming Sounds, which is an evidence-based wellness intervention that utilizes recreational drumming and sound medicine. I'm also an author of a book called The Sacred Seven, which is a guide to the fullness of self-identity based on that traditional introduction system that I just shared with you.
Oh, man, I love it. I hope you caught that all, everybody, right? There'll be a test after Andrew and I. Well, that's, I love it. You know, a fellow person in recovery, right? I'll be celebrating 22 years clean and sober this September. So it's always good to talk to, and then that drumming, I worked in a facility where every week we had this person that came in and did traditional like drumming and ancestral, you know, Native American stuff. And the clients loved it, right? Even if they weren't, you know, Native American, right? It was something that the owner thought the clients would like. And they all, they looked forward to her coming every week. So I appreciate you being here, Andrew. And, you know, what I like to do though, is like go back before you got started in all this, right? As a recovery specialist, as I've worked in the addiction field for almost 16 years now as a substance abuse counselor, right? We tell the audience like what happened, right? As kind of like in the program, right? What happened, or what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, so they can get an idea of the challenges you went through to get to where you are today and write a book and now helping others get sober, it sounds like.
Yes, for sure. I love working in the recovery space. That really feels like my home. So I grew up in a home where I was born into an inheritance of trauma. Both my parents died of drug-related causes. My mom from a cocaine overdose, and my father from cirrhosis of the liver caused by hepatitis C. So as a little boy, early memories were out shoplifting with my mom, to support her cocaine habit. She used to take me. My parents were what they call on the street boosters. So these are professional shoplifters. And I'm not talking about like going and stealing a candy bar. They wore disguises, they worked in crews. It was organized crime. And my mom used to take me in the grocery cart and she would have me look over her shoulder when she was boosting cigarettes or, alcohol, those kind of things. And then as I progressed, so my native side from New Mexico, they decided to move to Portland, Oregon. And then my Irish German side from Pennsylvania decided to move to a little barrio outside of Phoenix in a neighborhood called Suntown. So I kind of grew up brown in a white neighborhood and white in a brown neighborhood, which was really interesting to grow up in that environment. But in this little barrio, my dad had a gang name. They used to call him Robin Hood because he would shoplift and then sell to the fences, and the swap meets are a big thing out here in Arizona, and they would sell a lot of stolen merchandise in those places. And I moved a lot of stolen merchandise too when I was in high school. I used to sell cologne and perfume and that kind of stuff. So, growing up in that environment, it was very easy for me to get involved in the culture and the culture of substance use and those destructive behaviors. But I'd like to kind of rewind to a very formative incident in my life. And, when I talk about my parents, sometimes, people think, oh, they must have been horrible people. They really weren't horrible people. My dad and my mom were not abusive at all to me. They were neglectful because of the disease of substance use, but they really were not abusive. They never really put me down, never talked badly to me, never physically hurt me. I had other family members that did that, but my parents were actually kind of very, very good people to me, even though they were in this destructive behavior. And they did their best with the culture that they knew. But one day I remember during the Reagan era, and I'm an older person, I'm 50 years old. There was this thing called DARE, and some of the audience might remember that. I know you do, but it was DARE to keep a kid off drugs, and they had these armed police forces that would go into neighborhoods, and they would wave flags, and they had a whole like panel of drugs that they would show kids. And I mean, I'm in like the fourth grade, and these police come into my school. And prior to that, my mom watched on the news that they had been getting these children to turn in their parents for using cannabis. Back then we called it weed or marijuana. But one of my jobs was to clean the stems and the seeds out of the herb. That was what my job was as a kid. And I loved being around them when they were smoking weed because that was when they were all friendly. They were all like social. They weren't hiding in the bathroom, or isolating and getting high. And, it was really astonishing to me when my mom pulled me to the side and she said, if they ask you if we're smoking, you got to tell them that we're not, and they might try to interrogate you, and if you say anything, it's going to break up our family. And so I remember when they came in there, my heart was beating and my hands were sweaty, and I thought I was going to have to soldier up and, lie to these police. And they didn't take me into some dark room and interrogate me, but they did say to this group of children, if you have one drug addict parent, you're 50% more likely to become a drug addict. And that was the first time, Max, that anybody in my life told me that I was, genetically flawed, that I was going to become, like I was like 50 and a 50, that must be 100. That's me, and I felt this like dark cloud fall over me. And it took me a long time to kind of unravel that idea of that was my identity. It was like a series of events that helped me get to the path of trying to navigate the illusion of this, this disease being me. And when I was a kid, I was out shoplifting with my mom, and then by the time I was a teenager, I was in the spoon with my dad, meaning I was using heroin with my father, and we were stealing together. And um, one day he says to me, he says, "Son, you're going to prison." And I was like, "F you, Dad. What do you mean I'm going to prison? I'm not going to prison." He's like, "No, you like the fast money in this life. You're going to go to prison." And he's like, "Just promise me you'll stay out of the gangs. You won't gamble. You won't get high. You'll watch who you owe and who you lend to." He goes, "If you do those 5 things, you'll be all right in there." And, subsequently, I found myself on the very same prison yard I visited my dead father at when I was a kid. I went to the same yard he was on in Arizona State Prison. And then, I ended up going to federal prison. So I got a state and federal number, all drug related stuff, basically selling to support my habit is what I was doing. But while I was in there, I went through a 500-hour drug rehabilitation program. And this is an important part of this conversation because, I would go to these week-long programs, 30-day programs. I would even complete a 90 and 90. And it was just like I needed to sit down, like I really needed 500 hours. I needed 9 months. The extension of that is I did another 6 months in the halfway house after I did a 9 month program, which was really a continuation of that really rigid recovery. And for those people that are out there that are dealing with generational incarceration, generational substance use, don't kid yourself with a 30-day program. Don't kid yourself even with a 90-day program. We got to get real about this. You're talking about ending generations with your commitment to your recovery. And, however long you can stay in that place, if you got insurance that'll give you 6 months, use it. Take advantage of that. Listen, when I was in treatment in federal prison, when the fellas were slapping dominoes and playing spades, I was in the VHS library watching videos on cognition and developing healthy wellness practices. I was wanting and desiring to change. And I was scared. Brother, I was scared that I was going to go back out and use. When you find recovery in prison, you're walking with an AA book or a Bible, and they say, "What are you doing with that book?" You're going to put it down and stick a needle in your arm. This was the environment I was in.
Right.
I go into these treatment facilities now and I see these flat screen TVs and they got snacks and juices. And man, when I was trying to get clean, you were lucky if you got a rubber mat and a blanket, and they didn't have mat, in county jail. They didn't have, medically assisted treatment. And I mean, I might sound like an old timer, but the truth is as I am, like I've been around this for 24 years. I've been clean. And, that hardcore spiritual transformation, that awakening, that's me, and I didn't know if it was real. So I prayed that it would be real. I was
Right.
so afraid that I would lose it. And man, it was like, that fear and that reverence was a part of the first 10 years of my recovery. Just being afraid that I was going to lose my mind.
Right.
You
But
know,
you think about it, Andrew, that's like what my sponsor would call for me, like, because I had the same thing, right? That's that healthy fear, right? Like, keep, he always told me, keep your last relapse or all that right in the forefront of your brain and have a healthy fear of going back out. Because guys like, I mean, you and I, right? You've been to prison. I almost went to prison because, right? So this is for you. If you're paying attention, audience, whether you're in recovery or not, or have a loved one, listen to what Andrew's saying, right? Because a lot of it is generational stuff that, like, I come from a family where it was on my dad's and my mom's side, right? And like you, there was no abuse that happened as I was growing up. It just, the gene took, as they said, and it flowered, right? Because all I had to do is take that first drink or that first hit of weed and go, oh, I have arrived, right? Little did I know I wasn't paying attention to the red flags that would come later, right? Because I got this. But whether you're a great example, like, I want everybody to pay attention. If you want to change, whether it's if you're using or not, or just want to make a change, just know that you can do it. Andrew's a perfect example. He got sober in prison and said enough was enough. And I know guys like you too. When I um, was a speaker at a meeting, I'm 30 days sober. Normally you have 6 months, right? But the secretary had relapsed. I come walking down the street, like do 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 my, and I hear him talking about, hey, we need a new secretary. Our secretary just relapsed, right? And everybody turned, my sponsor, the house man, everybody looked at me. Oh, there we go. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? I'm only 30 days sober. And but I think it was one of those things where it was good for me to hear the people that came in, because I had this gentleman that came in at the time who was one of my speakers that shared about him and his partner, right, being in a level 4 yard in California going, we might not get out of prison, but we got to change. Like, this is getting old doing all this stuff, right? So they went to a meeting inside the prison walls. And so he shared how, they weren't supposed to get on parole, but all of a sudden him and his buddy are getting paroled, right? Because they got sober and they just kept going. And, the funny thing, and I shared this before, Andrew, is they talk about, because they started like a remodeling carpentry business, right? So they're in Santa Ana. They're going to this judge's chambers to redo his room, like the behind the, where they sit and they get out of the elevator, right? And they look up and it's the judge that sent him and his buddy to 25 years to life. They said they just smiled at each other and went like, God, like God works in mysterious ways, right? And I mean, I don't know if sure, if he had 17 years then he stayed sober, but those like yours are a lot of the stories I've come across, right? Like there's 7 of us from when I got sober, 7 of us, and 5 out of the 7 are ex-convicts that went to prison, right? Got out and said, I got to make a change, and are still sober today, 23, 24, 25 years later. Right. And I'm like,
that's amazing.
I'm an old timer too. Right. And like, I work in the addiction field. And like you said, sometimes I walk in and I go, man, we had a TV in our house, but it didn't work. Right. It was just for show. We weren't allowed to have a phone for 30 days. Right. Or whatever. You weren't allowed to, you had to go, your new job was to look for work until you got a job. Right. You go to meetings and, right. So because here everybody, Andrew's smiling. He knows what I'm talking about. Like, I miss those days of when you could be like strict, and right now it's like, oh, you can't give Johnny his phone or he's going to leave, and you should see the frustration on my face. But anyway, that's another podcast. Let's get back to Andrew. So,
well, I think that there's a little bit to unpack there because, the other day I was working with a client, and his parents called me, and he got busted. He gets busted with almost a quarter ounce of cocaine and 500 Xanax bars, and he gets released. Like they didn't even, and he was on a DUI too. That was the top of it. So he gets released from jail. And I'm thinking to myself, like, back in, when I was out there using, you were in. Like you were done, and now it's like it's a catch and release model, and I don't think that the destructive force of prison is necessarily a good model for an individual that's a nonviolent criminal, but I do think that there needs to be a stronger deterrent than just booking somebody, taking their fingerprints and letting them go. Right. Like these cops out here are driving by people smoking fentanyl. I mean, I can go down the street right now and I can drive by a group of people smoking fentanyl here in Phoenix, and it's just like I've never in my life experienced anything like what's going on. I mean, crack was bad and I lived through crack, but crack was isolated to areas. These people are like everywhere. It's nuts. Yeah. And it seems like our system is in a transitional moment where we're trying to find a more humane model. But it's a very challenging time for the person who's struggling with mental health concerns, for sure.
I'm that because like what I got a felony for, you would laugh at, right? Because now you're right. I wouldn't even probably go to jail. I would get a ticket or a slap on the wrist and right. But like you said, we grew up in a time. I remember when I went to jail to LA County for the first time, right? And I'm sitting on a bus going to court and I'm sitting next to right like an OG Southsider sitting next to me and he's telling me the story of how it's right when they enacted that 3 strikes and you're outlaw pretty much, right?
Man, yeah.
He goes, he's listening to me and he goes, stop while you're ahead. Like gets, like basically tell me get right so you don't have to go through this. Cause he was looking at 25 to life for a scrapey bat. He goes, you barely could, but because I was a 2 striker, I'm going to go to prison for the rest of my life now because of this law they enacted. Right. And I think you're right because I know friends who came out worse than before they went in. Right. It's not rehabilitation as we know. Right. And I think that's a whole, you and I could probably spend all day talking about like what that might look like for someone who is a nonviolent offender. Instead of sending them to prison, what can we do? Right. Instead, I'm with you. I believe in long-term treatment. That's why I'm grateful for the judge who said, you're going, but you're going for a year. And if you slip up, then I'll send you to prison. Right. Because I think, like you said, 30 days, you're not even scratching the surface of what's going on with an individual.
No.
And like you said, I mean, there's, as we know, Gabor Mate says he believes that most addiction stems from trauma, right? Something happened in our childhood to create this. You gave a perfect example. You were raised in an environment, right, with 2 parents who they weren't abusive, but they were teaching you behaviors that were non-conducive to staying out of prison or jail or getting in trouble, right? Because they're feeding their addiction. And if they don't, how are we going to, right? I mean, me and you would love to stop it and have a program where everybody gets to go for 6 months to a year, work on themselves instead of going to prison for a year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever the case may be, right? And
Yeah, and I think that another valid point in that is all these like uh crimes, shoplifting, prostitution, selling small amounts. There's a whole gamut of crimes that are associated, breaking into cars. These are small crimes that are non-violent crimes, but they're sometimes even looked at as misdemeanors without doing some sort of substance use check on the individual. If I would have gotten, because I was out shoplifting and my parents, they knew that if you were in a county, in a city, so if I'm over in Mesa, and this is the valley here in Phoenix, if I'm in Mesa and I get busted, I can't go back to Mesa for at least a year. So this is how the shoplifting community, the boosting community, navigates the misdemeanor charges that are associated with professional shoplifting. But let's say that you do get caught shoplifting. Why is it that we can't test a person for fentanyl or methamphetamine or cocaine and then utilize that as a standard for care? Because they're committing these small crimes to support their habit, which is then in turn turning into larger crimes because that person has to sell that stolen merchandise now to get the money to pay the dope man. And it's like if we had individuals that would really listen to this movement that's going on within peer support, and individuals that could come to the table and say, hey, these are areas that I feel could help support us creating a healthy community and stopping this years of destruction that we're living through. I think that these little sorts of tools to navigate that would be very important. And I'm not a policymaker at all, but I am involved in several boards. I'm on a behavioral health panel for the state of Arizona. I'm on a peer support panel for the state of Arizona. And we have these online meetings and it's great. We talk about things and we voice our opinions and, we try to do our best to get language into the ears of those individuals that could potentially, help with mitigating some of this destruction that's going on out there. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we could go in a direction like that. And to what you're saying about people, guys go in, they don't have a dad that's going to tell them not to do the things that my dad told me. My dad schooled me on how to be a criminal and how to survive prison. And I would watch these guys when I was in prison come in and they were scared. They've watched too many prison episodes on TV. They think that it has to be a certain way, and they get involved in these prison gangs that are real. I mean, these guys will kill you over nonsense. And myself, I didn't navigate any of that. I stayed in the recovery. I stayed in church. I did what I needed to do to keep my head down and do time the way I wanted to do time. Not because somebody else was going to dictate to me and tell me I had to do these things. I had to steal for them. I had to do all this. I just didn't participate. And that's a part of the conversation as well, as these platforms give us permission to educate those individuals that are on that teeter totter in the middle of that fine line, that razor's edge that could go out and use. You don't have to get involved in the gangs in prison. Regardless of what these TikTok people, Instagram people, YouTube people say. I mean, there's like this whole social media deal that's going on out there with these guys that, are severely mean looking gangsters that are telling people on TikTok and YouTube they had to do that. They did not have to get involved in those gangs. There is a level of autonomy when it comes to a person that's practicing Muslim belief, practicing a spiritual path, practicing recovery. If you go in there from jump and you let everybody know that you are going to practice recovery, then that means if you go and you use, oh man, it's a green light on you. Trust me, because they love to get after that person that's a hypocrite. But if you walk that line and you show integrity, like I did when I was in there, then you can walk through it and not have to get involved in any kind of nonsense, and you can live a stand-up life. And that side of the equation, it just is not romanticized like what the efforts are of these social media influencers that are out there spreading a really horrible message to the youth that are maybe facing time. It isn't fair to keep them in this idea of what they have to do in there. And what you have to do is learn how to recover. That's what you have to do, or you're going to die in there. And yeah.
Important point that you brought up though, right? Because you can prison if you choose to, but like you said, you have to live like by that code of integrity, right? You can't go in there with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Like, I'll hang with you guys, but I'm going to be over here doing this. They're going to be like, no, you're not. You're either all in or
No.
out, right? And
Yeah.
that's like, I believe, like out here being free men, right? Like, we can't be in recovery halfway in and then say I'm hanging out with these guys over here, right? Because you know what I mean? I want to be cool, right? But you thank God I didn't go to prison. I got this shit scared out of me, truthfully, about a month or so before I got sober, right? Like these two guys that I was hanging out with, big, right? And I always shared this story with the people that I know is like every time they were going to go get ready to commit a crime, they'd always say, here's some money, Max. We're hungry. Go get some food, right? And I'm thinking, okay, dude, I go get food. I come back, they're gone. And what they were doing was actually protecting me. Like, but one night they cornered me in a house and they said, look, bro, we like you, but go home and get right. Like, you don't belong here, was what they're telling me. And like, if we see you in prison, we're going to beat your ass for shits and giggles. Right. It was like their way of kind of showing they cared and didn't want me to go down that path. Right. Which I thank God I heeded the call, right? Even though I relapsed in my treatments, and sober living 4 times, I made it back. And here I am with you. You got 24, I've almost got 22. And we get to share this message with those youngsters out there because a lot of them, like you said, I think it's the social media where they glamorize that lifestyle, right? Like if you go in there, if you do this, you're going to be cool or whatever. Maybe, I may be wrong, but you and I know that prison is not fun, right? I mean,
Oh, it's the worst. It's the worst. I mean, it's Groundhog Day. You can tell a person where you're going to be a year from now at that time, and it'll be the same day, the exact same day. I mean, you're not going to see your loved ones. You're definitely not going to have any meaningful relationships. You'll build friendships in there, but it's all suspect. All of it's suspect, and it's just not an environment for anybody to have to recover. So I think that there's like a middle ground there, and you're a testament to that. That a person that can be sentenced to a year in recovery can come out and live a healthy life and begin to make a positive influence on the world. I myself, working in drug and alcohol treatment facilities now, yesterday I was at Native American Connections, and I've been with these guys for almost 10 years, working as a contractor. That's the majority of the work I do in recovery is through contract work. So I facilitate group meetings and I utilize recreational drumming and sound medicine. And I have guys, that are like tatted down, out of prison, go into a meditation, a sound journey, and come out the other side and ask me if that was God, because they never experienced anything spiritual in their life. But through these ancient techniques of utilizing the gong, chimes, singing bowls, Native American flute, and then really regulating the nervous system through drumming, we can create a vehicle that brings them closer to that transformational spiritual experience. And that for me is the power of the tens of thousands of years of evidence-based practice that have gone into drumming, singing, dancing. There was a time in our collective ancestral history when you would go to the medical practitioner in the village and they didn't take your blood, your poo, or your pee. They would ask you, well, when was the last time you drummed? When was the last time you sang? When was the last time you danced? And I think if we really look at quality of life for the person that's suffering out there, we need to create a container that's tangibly beautiful. And in our spirituality and in the extension of our spirituality, we learn these processes that bring us to that place of beauty. And when a person is authentically touched spirituality, you know it. You can recognize it in them because there's an overflowing presence that happens. And the youth that I counsel, I talk about quality of life. I talk about, well, what's your life like right now? Look around. Look around where you're living. Look at the filth you're living in. Look at the destruction you're living in. And I can share with you that there's another path where you can have a relationship with something greater than yourself that can really embody meditative practices. You can sit still and find yourself in the stillness. And going into a drug and alcohol treatment facility and seeing the change in people and then encouraging them to celebrate. You sat still for 3 minutes without twitching. Why don't you give yourself an attaboy for that? Why don't you give yourself an attagirl for that? Let's celebrate our spirituality. Let's celebrate that you were able to close your eyes and meditate today. Last week you couldn't close your eyes and feel safe. But these things we need to learn to encourage one another. We need to learn to encourage each other on this spiritual path, and we can begin to fortify that place of transformation inside of each other's hearts. And spirituality doesn't have to be in a church. It doesn't have to be in anything that looks like anything that But as long as you're able to enhance your quality of life and humble yourself and realize that there is something inside of you that holds potential, you can have a relationship with that. And in the Native American tradition, there's this idea of all my relations. Like this concept kind of permeates everything in what we call the red road, which is the road to recovery or well-briety. And I remember, as a person that grew up being taught I was Apache, Spanish speaking indigenous people from the border of Mexico, like it's a thing where, we're just trying to survive. Yeah, your family's indigenous, but what does that mean when you can't pay your light bill? That doesn't mean anything. So I held this in my heart for many years and I didn't know what it meant. And I'm still trying to figure out, what it means. But I do know that this principle of relational spirituality has given me a permission slip to say, I have a relationship to anxiety. I have a relationship to depression. I have a relationship to substance use disorder. And I even have a relationship to situational schizophrenia. And as I begin to unpack how the relational dynamic of my mental well being is unfolding and is living as I'm living, I can then navigate these parts of myself effectively. And I can look at the extension of that relationship to involve my community, my family, my relationship to the creator. All these things have turned into relationship, Max. And it feels really good to be in a place of sovereignty today, where I'm not pinned down by these things. I'm living in effective relationship with them.
Right. And I love what you talk about, because it doesn't mean it defines who you are. You just have a relationship with those different parts of yourself so that you could live authentically in this world, right? Like that's why I used to be Andrew, that old style counselor, right? When I was new, like, oh, if you don't do the 12 steps and do it my way, you're going to die. And I can't work with you because I can't watch you kill yourself. Right. And, luckily I had mentors would go, Max, slow down, bro. Like, leave that for the rooms or whatever, but that's not how we work here. And this brings me to a point, and I don't know if you've seen it. There's a guy named Johan Hari that did a TED talk, right? Because what you're talking about is what I'm trying to lead into now, right? He talks about what is the opposite of addiction, right? And you can hear
I love that.
you hear the crowd going
Yeah.
sobriety, recovery, and he's like, no, it's community or connection, right? And you know it, and I know it. Like I live in San Diego County now, right? But I can go to my meeting, and I can go to a meeting with Andrew, say in Arizona, and I walk in and it's like I'm at home. Like, cause just the community, you know what I mean? Like I may not know anybody in the room, but I know everybody in the room, right? And I can let the guard down and just go, oh, I'm home, right? And I've done that all over California and in other states, right? Where I, went to a meeting, and as soon as I hear the first person share, I'm like, oh, like cool, I can relax, because right, these are my people. And and that's what I love about recovery. And now I'm the guy who likes, I don't care what you do, right? But what you've been talking about is like find that thing that's going to fill your spirit. I don't care if it's the 12 steps. I don't care if it's, Buddhism or going back to church or what you, well, matter of fact, that's, we were talking about that earlier. Wellbriety, right? That was the name of my friend's group. She called it Wellbriety. It was every Thursday. And, right. When you can connect with people in such a manner, right? Like they say you've heard that saying where, we are people who would not normally mix, but we get sober and we're like hugging each other and, you know what I mean? Smiling, having coffee together, having a cigarette together. I mean, you can't beat that. That to me is how we start, right? Because I came out of jail going, I want to be like these people, right? Like, in my head, because where I came, I'm like, oh, these guys are lame. I don't want to do this stuff, right? And then this first lady hugs me and says, welcome. And I'm like, what are you doing, right? But I'm still, like talking with you and hearing how you share and what you're talking about is just, it warms my heart, because we need more of that in this world. Is right. If we can bring, especially people who are struggling from substance use disorder, right? And it's like you said, my sponsor says, when you watch the light eyes, there's nothing like it, right? Because I used to tell him, like, man, you saved my life. Till this day, I always tell him, you saved my life. I owe you so much. And he's like, no, you did the work. I just guided. God worked through me to get to you, and you did the work. He goes, but wait till you take someone through the steps and you're going to understand. Because he'd always tell me, Max, you're going to help me more than I ever help you. And I'm like, you're crazy, bro. Like, no way, man. Like, like, no way. And then the first one I took through the steps, I call him up all excited. I go, dude, I know what you're talking about. Like, I couldn't even sleep that night, right? I was to see the light come back in someone's eyes that just goes, there's more to life than putting a substance in my body now. Like, I understand what they're talking about, connecting with a higher power, whatever that looks like for you, right? And everybody, I'm sitting here talking with Andrew, and he's smiling back at me because he knows what I'm talking about, right? And I wish it was like that for everybody in the world, right? Where we can all just connect and have open and honest conversations without someone getting mad because you said something the way you believe or they believe and blah blah blah, right? Like, I didn't know Andrew before this interview, but me and him are already like connecting, like we're going to be brothers after this because we understand it, right? And he puts in the work, and we all do, right? That are helping others try to overcome their addiction, whether it's alcohol.
And that's important right there, man, is that path of service, bro. Like I was talking to one of my really good friends yesterday, and we were talking about, why is it that people why aren't they hungry to serve? And it's because of what you're sharing. They haven't seen that. They haven't tasted that. They haven't been able to experience the power of connection. And when you're doing it because of your relationship to your higher power, there's nothing in this world, bro, that can ever fill you like that. You know what I'm saying? When you see that glimmer in that person's eyes because you've allowed them to taste what you have been feeding on, bro, you will go, you'll bankrupt yourself doing that. You'll go down the darkest roads of life to serve because you understand that in that, right, there is a fulfillment and the optimization of your self identity. I mean, the truest Max and the truest Andrew is inside of that container, in that place of authentic spiritual giving. And in that practice of the 12 steps, in leading people to that awesome connectivity to source, to creator, to God, to Jesus, to nirvana, whatever it is you want to label it as, there's a purity of expression that is truly love. And man, when you feel love like that, spiritual love, bro, gosh darn it, dude, it is just the best thing in the world. And I was talking to my friend yesterday, and I was saying, why is there not more people dedicating their lives to this? He goes, out of 100, you'll probably see maybe 8, that you're going to come in contact with. He said it's not even going to be 10%. And I said, well, they haven't really experienced it, and I think that that's the truth. Mother Teresa, man, and I'm not a Catholic or anything like that, but this woman, she used to pray because she understood what we're talking about. She understood that in its essence is selfishness. Now trip out on this, right? How are you going to say that a servant mentality is selfishness? Well, it's because of who we're getting fed by. When you get, bro, when you get connected to that right there, to source, when you get connected to the life giver, the creator, whatever it is you want to say, when you get the higher power, bro, when you get that, that will fuel you through anything. You'll go out and rescue a drug addict at, whatever time of the night. You'll go do whatever you need to do. And she used to pray, God, let me serve without needing your love, because she understood that. She understood that this was a selfish experience. And to the person that's out there that maybe is new in recovery, go show up and make coffee. Go sweep the floor and do it as if you're doing it onto the creator of the universe. And I promise you, you'll start tasting that. Go set up the chairs. Serve however you can serve. Go get a food box for somebody. You know what? Do whatever you can to stay in that place of giving, and your cup will overflow, man. You'll have more than you need. I mean, I remember when I got out of prison, I needed a wallet. And I was like, I was holding all my stuff, my ID cards and all this. And I was like, God, I need a wallet. And I walked over to the trash can, and bro, there was a wallet in the trash. Somebody had just left the halfway house and threw away a wallet. And it was one of those old school, double button wallets that people used to have a chain on them. And I took that wallet, and I believe, like I felt when I picked up that wallet, I said, God, as long as I'm serving you, I know you're going to take care of everything, my finances, all of that. And there's times, bro, where I feel like, man, I'm not going to make it. But you know what? I always do. And I don't have to go out and hustle. I don't have to go out and steal. I don't have to do what my parents taught me to do. And I can live this beautiful spiritual life. And man, you know, I can smile, bro. You've been talking about my smile. Well, check this out, bro. My parents didn't have teeth. You know what I'm saying, bro? You know what I'm saying? I mean, come on, bro. You know? And here I am, brother, living this life, man. And it just, bro, it floors me, man. It floors me, bro.
It's the service thing is it's paramount to my recovery, right? And it's vital, as they say. And my and this is not a plug for any 12-step program or anything. My sponsor was a wise man after my last relapse when he said, I don't care who it is. You're not just going to be of service to the rooms of out, AA. If anyone puts their hand out, I want you to be helpful. And thank God I listened, right? Because it could be a family member, it could be a stranger that needs, some gas money or a ride, right? And I used to sit at the end of where I was, there was a cul-de-sac, right? And I would wait people get home from a meeting at night, and I'd say, get in my car, we're going to a meeting. They would look at me like, I just go change. I said, my duty tonight is to get you to a meeting, so get in my car and let's go. And it was a joke at the end, like people would just, they would get home, drop off their stuff, get in my car, and we all go to a meeting. And but there is something to that. Like, look at the conditions that, like you said, Sister Teresa lived in, and she never complained, right? She
No.
was right. But before we end here and stuff, I want to talk about your book, right? Like, we've had this great conversation. I mean, you and I could go for, I'm serious, hours and hours just talking about recovery, but like, give the audience what led to your book, what's in your book, and then we'll keep going. But I want to hear about your book.
Yeah, so the book is based on the traditional introduction process. It creates a foundation for self-identity that's familial. So we live in a culture that basically has created a model of self-identity based around behavior. And to quickly unpack where this comes from, it comes from a European model that's based around feudalism, manneralism, and the patriarchy, where only a small group of people could have a land-based identity. And these individuals were called landlords. Okay. Everybody else had to be a job, and you didn't have title. So because you didn't have title, you didn't have the same rights as people, all of these different ideas that were associated with a land-based identity. And this has systematically eradicated the way we view ourselves as earthlings. You know, every single one of us here is an earthling. We're connected to Mother Earth, and we're connected to our family, and our family to all the way back to the very dawn of creation has been connected to this earth. So there's basically 7 principles of the family: you, your mom, your dad, your mom's mom, your father's mother, your mother's father, and your father's father. These all represent archetypes that are associated with a functional spiritual person. So you represents the child within you. Your mom represents the feminine. Your dad represents the masculine. So the child is the feeling part of reality. The feminine is the emotional intelligence. And the masculine is the support system. So just understanding those 3 indigenous principles of self-identity, you're a lot further along than anyone, than the majority of people in our contemporary culture. But then we go to the grandparents, and the mother's mother represents that trinity of self-identity optimized in the fullness of you. So that's where you become an optimized human being, through acknowledging the feminine, the masculine, and the child. Once we identify that within ourselves, we can now navigate personal relationships, navigate our emotions, all of the complexities of the human design. And she rests in the East, mother's mother, your grandma, as that beacon of a fully functional person. Then your father's mother represents how you relate to your family: your mom, dad, grandmas, grandpas, aunties, uncles, cousins, sons, daughters, your husband, your wife, all of those familial relationships. Remember that idea of all my relations. This is creating a relational dynamic within yourself. Now we go to the mother's father, and this represents how you relate to your community, your church, your workplace, the government, your education system, all of those, your treatment facility, your 12-step program, all of those relations, your friends, all of that that's encompassing in the community. And then finally, the father's father, this represents how you relate to the elements: air, water, fire, earth, gravity, time, and spirit. And spirit, of course, represents your higher power. So this is all of the encompassing parts of the human relational spirituality, how that can be formulated in a ceremonial introduction and create a foundation for self identity. And that's a modern revelation of a very ancient technology of understanding yourself. And so I was, in ceremony, I got to hear elders introduce themselves, and it just baffled me. What does that mean? And then I started praying with that. And I've been on what they call the red road of recovery now for 15 years, where I've been participating in Sweat Lodge sometimes twice a week, going to other ceremonies, fire ceremonies, gone ceremonies, different ceremonies, trying to understand this idea of relational spirituality. And that's what the book is. There's also some, information there on my life of, navigating my parents' incarceration, my substance use, my opiate use, like these sorts of things. And it really gives hope to people. And all of the audience can get my book for free. You just go to thesacred7.com. If you buy a copy of my book, I will send one into the Arizona Department of Corrections. I just sent 20 books in there. I had one of my relatives that I was working with, he relapsed, went back to prison, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, uncle, I got your book, but the last 2 chapters are ripped out." And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." Somebody ripped out those chapters and sent them home to their family members, and that felt pretty good. So people are reading it in prison. They're using it. It's changing lives. And, any support. You can also get it on Amazon. It's on Amazon, the audio, or the ebook is on Amazon too. But you can get that PDF copy just by signing up. And I do a spiritual community as well on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We talk about spirituality on a Zoom call, and everybody's welcome to that. It's free of charge. I do ask for suggested donation, but if you can't afford it, you can just come. It's something that I do for the community.
Love it. Well, you answered some of the questions, but now I'm going to ask you my questions. Because this has been like, brother, I could sit here for a couple hours at least and I got questions. And I may bring you back for part 2, right? Because there's stuff I want to understand when it comes to the Native community, right? Because, we all know that there's alcoholism is rampant in some of those communities when it comes to, right? Because I don't know the statistics, but they show you like in school and stuff where there's a higher rate of alcoholism on certain reservations than there is other ones. And, like that's a discussion we can have at another time because, like my sponsor put it to me, right? I want to help as many people. And if I can bring you to the world that someone I know goes, "Hey, I can relate with Andrew. I need to get a hold of him." Right. So, but let me ask my questions first. So Fearless, right? I wrote a book, same name as my podcast, and Fearless is my first question. It goes like this. So what does fearless mean to you now, Andrew? And how does that show up in your life on a daily basis?
Fearless to go forward into your best authentic self. To be truly fearless is to give yourself permission to be who you truly are.
I love it. Next question, right? Happiness. And you can see I put a Y in it and I put it in there for a reason. What does happiness mean for you, Andrew? And how does that show up in your life?
Oh my goodness. Hold on. Something happened with the sound, bro.
I can hear you.
I can barely hear you.
Oh, wow.
Let's see here.
Excuse the technical difficulties, everybody. We'll be right back. Can you hear me now?
I could barely hear you, but what was the second question?
A
Let me
happiness.
turn this thing off real quick. Hold on. All right, I'm back.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So happiness, knowing I put the Y in happiness, what does happiness mean to you? And how does that show up in your life today?
Happiness. Oh, I'm going to share with you that recently happiness has taken on a new meaning. And I've experienced a level of happiness in my meditative practice. So I've been meditating for about 15 years. And I can tell you that recently, in the past, I'm not even kidding you, bro. In the past month, I've finally experienced a deeper level than I ever have. And that, man, is a celebratory vacation that I would define as happiness. And man, is it a beautiful thing to be able to be there. And it's been like layers of unraveling to get me to that place. So if I'm going to truly define happiness, I'm going to say it's my connection to my higher power.
Love it. I love it. I love it. And if you could see the smile on his face as he's saying that, everybody, you could see, like we were talking about the light. Andrew's got some light beaming from him today. So I appreciate you being here. Like I said, it's been an amazing, amazing time. But to ask you again, if my audience wants to get a hold of you or get your book, how do they do that again? If you could tell them again.
thesacred7.com. Best way. And you can also follow me at Drumming Sounds on Facebook. Mostly I'm there. I'm also on, if you just Google Andrew Ecker, it'll pull me up. But I'm mostly on Facebook. I don't do a lot of social media, but Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, I got some stuff out there, but I don't really spend a lot of time on it.
You're too busy, man.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
I do. I do. Well, like I said, Andrew, this has been an honor for me to have you on the podcast. So grateful that you took me up on this and were a guest today. But you're not quite off the hook just yet. I get to ask you my favorite question of all, and it goes like this. So what is the one piece of advice, Andrew, that you could give my audience to help them grow as human beings and become better people?
So I really believe that by quieting yourself in humility and being, I want to say, spiritually desperate to seek that which is the ultimate guidance, that you will find that. And when I think about my greatest transformational moments in my life, those moments came through a hunger for authenticity, connection, and relationship. And as I humbled myself and I just pled, I mean, literally asked, and you know what, you'll receive. And I think that the more that we can go into that authentic place of understanding that it's okay to need help, and that the ultimate authority is your connection to your higher power, whether that's Jesus or whatever you want to call it. I think that there's power in prayer, and Buddhism. I mean, I practice just about everything I can, as long as it's healthy, and as long as it's going to help me understand the creator in a new way, I'm open to it. And it's important for us to understand how to be in relationship with that which is a mystery, so I hope that helps. It's probably a little bit challenging, but I promise you, once you understand what I'm talking about, you'll fully understand it.
Absolutely. There is something to that saying that says, in the seeking you will find, right? So I love it. Like, this has been an amazing time, my friend. Like, thank you so much. Man, you heard him, everybody. If Andrew made you think, if he taught you something, if he made you smile, and of course, my famous, if he made you go, I like that. Please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star review so more people can find the podcast. And again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this world. This is Matt from the Fearless Happyness podcast. Until next time.
Are you tired of being weighed down by life's traumas and struggles? Join the Fearless Happiness lifestyle and let us guide you toward a brighter future. Explore our past podcast episodes and get a copy of the Fearless Happiness book to ignite your inner strength. If you or someone you love is battling addiction or facing challenges related to unresolved trauma, know that we are here for you. Visit maxnijst.org, maxnijst.org, and take the first steps toward finding your fearless happiness. Thank you for listening. This has been a production of Fearless Happiness.